Hey there, you're here because you're craving a deep dive. And today, well, we're tackling a topic that's as relevant now as it was decades ago. Buckle up, because we're jumping into the world of amusing ourselves to death.
Amusing Ourselves to Death. Written by Neil Postman, of course. It might sound like, well, a catchy headline, but it's a really thought-provoking book that digs deep into how media shapes our thinking. We're focusing on the 20th anniversary edition here, specifically his son Andrew's introduction, where he connects the book's original 1985 context to a rapidly changing world in 2006.
Okay, so you might be thinking, a book about television from almost 40 years ago. How relevant can that be in our world of instant information and constant digital stimulation? It's a fair question, right? And in fact, Andrew Postman talks about how some of his students had that exact reaction. He even shares this hilarious anecdote about one student who groaned about having to read a book that wasn't published yesterday.
You know that anecdote. As much as it makes us chuckle, it actually underscores Postman's central argument. He wasn't just critiquing television as a medium, but rather exploring how any dominant form of media can reshape our understanding of the world, really. How the way we consume information influences what we believe, how we interact, even how we perceive reality itself.
So it's less about the specific content on, say, TV versus the internet, and more about what those technologies do to us, right? How they change our relationship with information, with each other, with the world around us.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is how Andrew Postman illustrates this in his introduction. He talks about his students in 2006, who are already deeply immersed in the digital age. These students, when asked to find a non-entertainment cable channel, they struggle to come up with anything beyond C-SPAN.
Which, let's be honest, isn't exactly known for its edge-of-your-seat programming.
Exactly. It highlights how, even back then, entertainment was already becoming the dominant mode of communication, even for seemingly serious topics.
And it's not just about the lack of non-entertainment options, right? Andrew Postman also talks about the 2004 election, Schwarzenegger announcing his candidacy on The Tonight Show, complex political debates reduced to sound bites and photo ops. That line between information and entertainment was blurring rapidly.
Absolutely. And one of the most striking examples he gives is the rise of these Bible magazines, designed to mimic the look and feel of teen magazines. Even Faith, it seemed, wasn't immune to this trend of packaging serious topics in an easily digestible, entertaining format.
It's almost like we're hardwired to crave distraction, to turn everything into a spectacle. And that makes me think about that e-media fast experiment Andrew Postman describes, where his students, those same digital natives, had to completely unplug from all electronic media for mere 24 hours.
Yeah, it's remarkable how even the students who thought it would be easy, they were surprised by how deeply it affected them. Many reported feeling anxious, disoriented, even physically uncomfortable without their usual digital distractions.
It's like we've become so accustomed to being constantly plugged in, constantly entertained, that we've forgotten how to just be without it. Which brings us back to Neil Postman's core argument, really. It's not just that media reflects our culture, it actively shapes it.
And he takes this idea all the way back to the Bible, pointing to the Second Commandment and its prohibition against graven images. It wasn't just about religious idolatry, but about the very nature of representation and how it shapes our understanding of the world.
It's fascinating, right, to think that even thousands of years ago, there was this concern about how the way we represent ideas, the forms we use to communicate, can have a profound impact on how we think and what we believe.
And this concern has echoed throughout history. Plato, for example, he worried about the shift from the oral tradition to the written word, fearing that it would diminish our capacity for true dialogue and debate. Similar anxieties surfaced with the invention of the telegraph, photography, and later, the internet.
So Postman is part of this long line of thinkers who've recognized that new ways of communicating aren't neutral. They come with their own set of biases, their own limitations, their own implicit suggestions about how we should experience and understand the world.
Precisely. And to illustrate this point, Postman uses some really compelling examples. For instance, he talks about how the invention of the news of the day was only possible after the telegraph. It was the technology itself, with its ability to transmit information quickly across vast distances, that enabled this new way of understanding current events, a way that emphasized speed and brevity over depth and context.
And we see this even more today with the 24/7 news cycle and social media, right? It's all about headlines, sound bites, and viral moments, often at the expense of nuance and in-depth analysis.
Exactly. And this brings us to another one of Postman's insightful observations. He argues that different media end up abbreviating reality for us. packaging it in ways that are digestible but not always fully representative of the complexity they're trying to convey. He uses the example of the crossword puzzle, which gained popularity alongside the rise of disconnected information.
That's such a fascinating connection. It's like the crossword puzzle, with its emphasis on finding connections between seemingly unrelated bits of information, became a sort of coping mechanism for this new world of fragmented knowledge.
It's a curious parallel, isn't it? And it speaks to this broader idea that every new medium, rather than being neutral, arrives with a built-in bias, a kind of unspoken suggestion about how we should think and talk about the world. It's not that someone is intentionally trying to mislead us, it's that the very structure of the medium shapes the way we interact with information.
Okay, let's dive into some more specific examples of how this plays out. Postman talks about how the very structure of television, with its emphasis on visual stimulation and emotional engagement, lends itself to entertainment over education, to spectacle over substance. He even goes so far as to say that serious television is almost a contradiction in terms.
And to really illustrate this, think about those examples from 2006 that Andrew Postman mentions, that episode of Nightline. That attempted to tackle the weighty issue of nuclear arms control, but ended up becoming more about star power and dramatic tension than a nuanced discussion of policy.
Or how about Archbishop O'Connor donning baseball caps during his installation ceremony? It's like even solemn events weren't immune to this need to entertain, to make things more visually appealing and easily digestible.
And then there's that example of the Professor of the Year resorting to slapstick comedy to teach about molecules. It's both humorous and a little bit alarming.
Right. It's like on the surface, these are just quirky anecdotes. But Postman would argue that they point to a deeper shift in our values, a blurring of the lines between what's important and what's merely entertaining. Are we losing our ability to appreciate things that are meaningful, even if they're not flashy or immediately gratifying?
That's the danger Postman highlights. He worried that this tendency to turn everything into entertainment could have a profound impact on things we hold dear. Meaningful political discourse, quality education, even our very understanding of truth.
So what happens when the lines between entertainment and reality become so blurred that we can no longer tell the difference? And more importantly, what does this mean for us as individuals navigating a world saturated with information and entertainment? Stay tuned because we're about to dive even deeper into these questions after a quick break.
You've hit on a crucial point there. Like, we're constantly navigating this vast sea of information and entertainment. And it's becoming so hard to distinguish between the two. It's like that famous line, the medium is the message. You can't separate the content from the form it's delivered in.
So it's not just about being more discerning about the content we consume. It's also about being aware of how the very act of consuming that content, in whatever form it takes, shapes our understanding of the world.
Exactly. And this is where Postman's work becomes so relevant to our digitally driven lives, I think. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves, like, scrolling through social media feeds, bombarded by headlines, images, and videos, all vying for our attention? It's a constant stream of information, really, often presented in a way that's designed to be instantly engaging, but not necessarily conducive to deep thought or critical analysis.
Right, it's like we're caught in this endless cycle of scrolling and liking and sharing without really stopping to process what we're consuming or how it's affecting us.
And that's the danger Postman was warning us about. He argued that this constant bombardment of information, particularly when it's presented in a way that prioritizes entertainment value over substance, can have a numbing effect on our minds, makes it difficult to focus, to think critically, to engage in meaningful dialogue.
So it's not just that we're being passively entertained. It's that this constant state of passive entertainment might be eroding our ability to engage with the world in a more active, thoughtful way.
Precisely. And this has profound implications for our personal lives, our relationships, our ability to participate in a democratic society if we're constantly distracted, if we're losing our ability to think critically and engage in reasoned debate. Well, it becomes much easier to be swayed by emotional appeals, right?
Right.
By misinformation, by those who seek to manipulate us for their own gain.
Okay, so we've established that this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate. This is about how we live our lives, how we make decisions, how we relate to the world around us. But what can we do about it? It feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest. Are we just supposed to, like, unplug from everything, throw away our smartphones?
I can go live in a log cabin somewhere. Well, while a digital detox can certainly be beneficial, I don't think it's a sustainable solution for most of us. We live in a world where these technologies are so deeply integrated into our lives, and there's no denying the many benefits they offer.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether,
Yeah.
but rather about finding a healthier way to coexist with it.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important things we can do is to simply become more aware of how these technologies are affecting us, to pay attention to how we feel after spending hours on social media, or binge watching a show, or scrolling through news headlines. Are we feeling informed and energized? Or are we feeling drained and overwhelmed?
Right. It's about being more mindful, more intentional about how we use these technologies, right? Not letting them use us.
Precisely. It's about setting boundaries, about creating space for reflection and contemplation, about seeking out information and experiences that challenge us, inspire us, and connect us to something larger than ourselves.
So it's not about becoming Luddites, but rather about becoming more conscious, more discerning consumers of the digital age.
Exactly. And this is where Andrew Postman's insights, building upon his father's work, becomes so valuable. He argues that the questions his father raised about television in 1985 are even more relevant today in our hyper-connected world, he writes. What happens to us when we become infatuated with and then seduced by them? Do they free us or imprison us? Do they improve or degrade democracy? Do they make our leaders more accountable or less so? Are the trade-offs worth it?
Those are some heavy questions.
Hmm.
And they're not just about television anymore. It's like he's challenging us to really examine our relationship with all forms of media, with technology in general, and to ask ourselves whether it's serving us or whether we're serving it.
And that's a conversation we need to be having, both individually and as a society, because the stakes are incredibly high. Our understanding of the world, our ability to think critically, our capacity for empathy and connection, even our sense of self, these are all shaped by the media we consume and the technologies we use.
So where do we go from here if we accept this premise that our media environment is having a profound impact on who we are and who we're becoming? What can we do to ensure that this impact is a positive one? It's like we're standing at a crossroads, We have access to more information than ever before, but we also face this constant barrage of distractions, this pull towards the easy and entertaining at the expense of, well, the challenging and profound. So how do we navigate this new landscape? How do we ensure that we're using these powerful tools in a way that enriches our lives rather than diminishes them?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's any one easy answer. But I think a good starting point is to recognize that we have a choice. We don't have to passively consume whatever is thrown at us. We can be more intentional about the media we consume, the technologies we use, and the information we allow into our lives.
So it's about becoming more active, more discerning consumers, not just letting the algorithms decide what we see and how we think.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our agency, right? Our ability to choose what we pay attention to, what we value, and how we define what it means to live a good life in a digitally saturated world. And this might mean making some difficult choices. It might mean stepping away from social media, or cutting back on our screen time, or seeking out information from sources that challenge our assumptions, rather than just confirming our biases.
It's about being willing to be uncomfortable, right? To wrestle with complex ideas, even if they don't fit neatly into a 140-character tweet or a catchy headline.
Precisely. And this is where I think Postman's work is so important. He reminds us that the pursuit of truth, the search for meaning, the desire to live a life that is both fulfilling and impactful, these are not always easy or entertaining endeavors. They require effort, attention, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us.
So in a way, it's about rediscovering the value of boredom, of stillness, of allowing ourselves to be alone with our thoughts without the constant need for distraction.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We live in a culture that celebrates busyness, productivity, and constant stimulation. But it's often in those quiet moments, the spaces between the noise, that we connect with our deepest selves, that we grapple with the big questions, that we discover what truly matters.
And maybe, just maybe, by creating more of those spaces in our lives, by resisting the urge to be constantly entertained, we can start to shift the culture itself. We can start to create a world where depth and nuance are valued over superficiality, where critical thinking is celebrated over blind consumerism, and where we approach each other with more curiosity, empathy, and understanding.
That's a vision worth striving for. And while it might seem like a daunting task, remember that it all starts with individual choices. Each time we choose to have a meaningful conversation instead of scrolling through our phones, each time we pick up a book instead of binge watching a show, each time we engage with the world in a way that is both thoughtful and deliberate, we're taking a small step towards creating that kind of world.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the pace of technological change, by the constant influx of information, by the seductive allure of entertainment. But what I take away from Postman's work and from our conversation today, is a sense of hope. Hope that by becoming more aware of the forces shaping our thinking, by reclaiming our agency as consumers and citizens, and by cultivating a deeper appreciation for the things that truly matter, we can navigate this new landscape with more wisdom, more intention, and more heart.
Beautifully said. And remember, dear listener, this is not a destination, but a journey of exploration, of discovery, and of continually questioning the world around us.
And we'll be here with you every step of the way, diving deep into the topics that matter, uncovering hidden connections, and asking the tough questions that help us make sense of it all. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep